As a reviewer here on YouTube, I get accused of being a shill from time to time, of being overly positive about products, and whilst I don't actually think that's true, and if you look through my history of reviews, I've got lots of kind of mediocre and negative reviews here on the channel from all sorts of sources. But just in case there was any doubt, I thought it might be a good idea to round up what I think are 3 of the worst headphones on the planet and share them with you. These headphones are both subjectively bad and objectively pretty bad too, so they're 3 that you really should avoid. And so my plan for today's review is to check out all 3, describe them to you, and crown which one I think is the worst of the worst in this bunch. To maintain a bit of suspense here, I'm not going to tell you what the headphones are immediately, but I am going to show you some measurements. Now it's worth remembering that the compensation curves I use and the measurement rig that I use are not industry standard. So these graphs may look a little bit different to what you're used to seeing from these particular headphones if you've seen them before. One of the reasons that I like my particular setup though is that if you were to get a headphone that measured dead flat on this particular compensation curve, that would approximate basically a neutral sound to our ears, so similar to a perfect set of studio monitors in a perfectly treated room. As you can see when I show you this graph here, they're far from that. At first glance, the Aquatrace might look like a good headphone, but there are a few issues with it that we'll come back to shortly. If we also then look at the pink and the orange traces that are somewhat similar, I do think that these actually might be coming out of the same factory, but that's not necessarily disclosed by the retailers, and indeed both of these are sold under different brands, and that's a bit concerning too perhaps. If we look a bit closer at the pink and the orange headphones, so I'm going to refer to these by their colours on the graph for now. If we look at the pink and the orange headphones, both of those are using a 40mm dynamic driver with a TPE or like a plasticky style diaphragm. Not one of my favourite styles of diaphragm, but you can make a good sounding headphone with those based on past experiences. These 2 headphones are also an on-ear design, but as we've heard from the likes of ThinkSound and ETA headphones, you can make excellent on-ear headphones if you put the right attention into the design, the manufacturing, the tuning, etc. If we then turn our attention to the aqua-coloured trace, the aqua-coloured trace comes from a headphone with a 50mm dynamic driver, and then going beyond that, all these headphones have an impedance around about that 32 ohm mark, so very moderate impedance and very high sensitivity up around the 100 or above decibels per milliwatt. So they're easy to drive, they're moderate impedance, there's really no reason why these should be struggling, it's definitely not a source issue. Unfortunately, as we dive even deeper into the objective measurements of these headphones, and I'm not a big believer in measurements telling the whole story, but there are a few measurements that you really want to avoid, and one of them is bad total harmonic distortion. All 3 of these are terrible there. All 3 of them have consistent levels up towards 2% total harmonic distortion down in the bass range, and one of them even peaked briefly up to 5% total harmonic distortion. Now that 5% peak may have been environmental noise, so I'm going to give it a pass on the 5%, but there were enough consistent measurements hitting up around 2% that it's still really, really bad. The final thing that pulls apart all of these in sound quality is the resonance inside the cups. Now all 3 of these happen to be closed backs, which are a harder headphone to make. And in the case of all 3 of these, what you see as you start looking at the waterfall graphs is we start to get extended resonance in the cups. So instead of the driver delivering sound and then stopping delivering sound, what happens is you get the sound and then you get all the echoes and reverberations throughout the cups of the headphones. And so what all that translates to is sound in all 3 of them that's muddy, it's a bit distorted, it's unclear, there's poor separation, it's just not good. But as I said at the outset of the video, the name of this review is to work out which of these is actually the worst, so unfortunately I did have to do some listening. And what I'm going to do is just describe the sound of these as I picked them up and tried them out, so this next bit is in no particular order. I happen to reach for the headphone first, that's represented by the pink trace on the graph, and as you'd expect from the graph, it does have an overly thick mid-range sound. The bass actually had a surprising amount of impact despite what's on the graph, but where the graph isn't lying or isn't misleading is that it does roll off very fast. As you'd probably expect from the graph, the tonality of this headphone is also quite unbalanced. Again, very mid-range focused, the treble actually rolls off quite quickly, and the bass, as I said, rolls off really badly as well. Finally, if we move beyond things like tonality, what I also found from this headphone with the pink trace was that the soundstage is also pretty poor. The sound is all generally inside the head, stretches pretty strongly left to right without much depth, and is generally not well separated, so you don't get much sense of clarity or information and focus within the soundstage. It's just kind of a bit of a wall of sound spread left to right with everything blurring together. If we then move over to the similar headphone, the one represented by the orange trace on the diagram, this headphone just has a weird presentation. Now, I don't know if the one that I've got here is actually faulty, maybe it is, but the soundstage just has this weird presentation. It skews things a little bit to the right. It doesn't sound like a channel imbalance though, so much as a focusing issue of the image. I really don't know what's going on. Maybe there's quality control issues and this has got some variance that it shouldn't have out of the factory. But all I can tell you is that the sound was just flat out wonky. Just as you'd expect, knowing that the pink trace and the orange trace headphones come from probably the same manufacturer, the actual general sound quality was also pretty poor here. And so I moved on pretty fast because the orange headphone was looking to be probably the worst of the bunch here. But then I moved over to the Aquatrace headphone and it had its own arguments for being even worse. Where things started to go wrong here was that the ergonomics of this headphone are one of the worst I've ever come across. It doesn't seal properly to the head, even though these are actually an over-ear model. I didn't mention that before. But the fit and the finish of them is so poor that you don't get a very good seal, and so the bass performance is going to vary a lot from person to person. And so even though on the graph it looks like it should sound good, it really doesn't. And a lot of that's going to come down to the internal resonances that I spoke about before within the cups of these headphones. I haven't bothered to pull it apart, but my guess is they haven't bothered to do any kind of damping or tuning of the internal cavity, and you can definitely hear it. And so whilst technically the tonality from top to bottom is fairly balanced between bass, mids and treble, the clarity, the resolution and the separation is just horrendous. And so this might sound like I'm being really harsh on these headphones, and I guess I am. But unfortunately, there are products on the market that are this bad, and you need to be careful not to buy them. And so after much deliberation and thinking this through, I have decided which of these I think is the worst and which is the least worst, I guess. Coming in as the least worst of these would be the SY G25 RGB headphones. These are absolutely terrible, but they're actually not the worst thing that I've got here. Although I am very disappointed that these were meant to be a cat ear headphone, and clearly these are not cat ears. Since when do cats have antlers? And by the way, for those of you that want to know how well the microphone works, I didn't test it. Moving on from there, things get even worse when we turn to the pink headphone with the pom-poms. This thing is absolutely horrendous. By the way, the pads on these are not removable, so don't try to remove them. You won't be able to get them back on, as you can see here. And that leaves us with the most worstest headphone on the planet. And that's going to go to the unicorn headphone with the cat ears. I don't know what happened to this one. The channel balance is off. I can't get it to play properly. It's apparently an identical design to this one, as you can see, and yet this just doesn't work, even when plugged into the same devices, same adapters, etc. So these are not even fit to go to my 4-year-old son. These are going to get somehow destroyed, thrown in the bin, or who knows what. And so my public service announcement for today is don't buy any headphones like these. There's decent stuff out there. Don't ruin your kids' lives. And likewise, if you're a gamer looking for a comms headphone, this is not an answer. Do not buy this. Find something that's maybe costing you a little bit more and actually worth listening to. And so if you want to see these headphones blown up, I'm going to give that a try next. Stick around, make sure you check that out. And also I want to say a huge thanks to Aaron, who was kind enough to lend me things like this shit Jotunheim 2 and his shit Mjolnir 3. He's brought some wonderful reviews to this channel, and now he's brought you this pile of rubbish as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you had a bit of a laugh. I hope there was some suspense along the way. Happy April Fools. If you had a bit of a giggle, hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. I promise not all the reviews are like this one. And now let's take a look and see if I can blow up any or all of these 3 horrible headphones. Thanks everyone. Have a good day. Coming in as the least